Hello. Is this what it's like inside the Ghostbuster Marshmallow Man? You know, at the end when he's destroying the city? Is this what it's like to be inside there? Like, no wonder he destroyed the city. There's quite a lot of spiky right angles in the International Leeds Gaming Festival lineup. My name is Alysia Judge, and I am a freelance games presenter and producer. I used to work at IGN, and I've gone for a bunch of other places. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about how to get a job in the games media. But also, I kind of want to explode it out slightly, because we're talking about the games industry as a whole. There are so many jobs that you can get. And we always tend to focus on games media, I guess, because it's what we consume. You know, it's the thing that we understand. We know what makes a good video. But actually, there's so many jobs. Basically, whatever skill you have, you can find a job in the games industry. So if the clicker works, yeah. So just to give you a bit of a background. So I started at Official PlayStation Magazine doing some work experience when I was at university. And then I hopped to a few different outlets, learned video production randomly in a remote cottage in Sweden because the creative Candy Crush, I interviewed him, and at the end he was like, "Have you ever done video before? I really enjoyed this chat." And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Would you like to move to Sweden and run a YouTube channel for me on game design?" And once I realized that he wasn't a total chancer, I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And that basically gave me the show reel to apply to IGN and then work for 2 years for them as their UK host. And then off the back of that, I've done work with BBC, Sky, BAFTA, Al Jazeera, because actually the games media isn't just the games media. There is mainstream media are crying out for voices who understand games. Who here has ever read an article or seen a headline in the mainstream media that so frustrated them because they feel like it misrepresents games? Yeah, totally. It's so frustrating. And that's why we need more voices, more people who actually understand games, aren't going to do the moral panics, are actually going to be able to really represent our industry. So, first up, click. There we go. What jobs are there in the games industry? Because there are many. So, can I get a show of hands of how many people are actually interested in game development jobs as well? Excellent, loads. Oh, okay, fantastic. I am preaching to the converted. All right, so this is the next slide. So games creator. Basically, these guys create the gaming universe for the player, and there is so much here. I think a lot of people think that if they're wanting to get into game design, that you've got to be super technical and mathsy, and in certain aspects you absolutely do. Actually, I think the University of Leeds are here, and they're trying to get people into computer science because that is such a good route into a totally fascinating aspect of game design, like programming. But there's also people like audio engineers. I'm doing some work with Ninja Theory at the moment, and a massive part of that studio is this whole project on just designing the tools to make the games. No one thinks about that. How do you design a game engine? You've got to be one step ahead technically and creatively of all the other game designers, because you need to design the tools that they'll need. And you've got to be able to think, oh, what experience would they want to make that I can create for them? There's also producers. If you have no technical or artistic ability, but you're so acutely organized, that is where producing comes into its own. And you don't need a technical degree for that. You just need to be really good with people, super organized, and have a great vision. Video editors. So this is kind of where there's a crossover between games media. You can start in games media. And like me, I'm working with Ninja Theory at the moment on their video production and stuff. There's a real crossover in terms of if you're a storyteller, game studios can also be a place for you. Designers, writers, directors, actors, VO artists, motion capture technician, there is a lot of stuff. But it also takes more than designers to make a game. People always forget that a game studio is a massive community in and of itself. You need community managers, but you also need PR, marketing. You need a lawyer. Who knew that you could study law, the most straightforward and noble of the careers, and end up working in a game studio? IT support, HR, sales. There are many, many routes into the games industry. And that brings us into games media, because all of that creates the experiences that we play. And the role of the games media is to tell that story. We often think of the games media as there's a lot of personalities, aren't there? There's a lot of YouTubers, and people tend to make it about themselves when you're creating content. And I really don't see it that way. I see my job as a games journalist to accurately reflect, chart and chronicle and explain why we're playing the games that we're playing, what we're making, what that says about us culturally, like where are we at? And there's so many different outlets out there, like The Guardian does a really great job of kind of curating all of that content, Kotaku, and there's loads of YouTubers out there doing the same. So there's a bunch of different roles, everything from being a staff writer to a critic. Critics are basically guys who just write reviews, have really, really good opinions on games, and can kind of synthesize them down into 800 words or so. Producers and editors, YouTubers, streamers. But again, there's the roles here that you never think of. You know, studio technician. At IGN, we had a guy called Dale. If you listen to the IGN UK podcast, you might be familiar with his dulcet tones. But literally, like, he was instrumental to running that studio. He just grabbed all the cameras. He'd keep control of them. He was in charge of all the edits. Like, we could not run IGN UK without him, and he had such a voice in terms of the content that we created. And yeah, it runs from print, online, video, TV, radio. There are so many different platforms, and it's just kind of working out what content do you want to make and what platform would you put that on. Because if you want to do really deep kind of dives into game design, then actually, you know, print is not always the best place for that. You can end up writing a whole book on an aspect of game design. But if you're someone like Mark Brown, who does Game Maker's Toolkit, he goes and creates these amazing, like, 7 or 8 minute videos that uses the pictures to tell 1,000 words, and then he can really kind of dive into exactly what a game developer's doing there by showing it on screen. So work out what it is you're interested in communicating and find a platform that works for you. And then there's also the opportunities you might not have thought of. So I'll whiz through these. You know, things like esports, event management, like the guys here who, you know, making a job out of organizing games, conferences, and events. Law, charity work, Yuki, that's like working with the government to like go literally to 10 Downing Street and like knock on the door and say, Theresa May, let's pay attention to the games industry. There's so many people lobbying the government and the lawmakers to kind of pay attention to what it is that we're doing. So this brings me all to the question of whether you should go to university, because with all of those jobs and opportunities out there, do you go for 3 years and sit in a lecture hall, and what can you learn from there that you can then apply to all of those different opportunities? I can only speak from the position of games media. I mean, you know, there are loads of different people here. As mentioned before, Leeds University will be great to talk to if you're interested in going into the technical side. But from a games media perspective, I did go to university. I studied English literature at the University of York, and I loved it. It was really, really fun. But nothing in my degree has applied to the work that I do now, because the majority of the work that I do now is editing, it's technical, it's script writing, it's learning what aperture is, and ISO, and all of this kind of stuff. And they don't teach you that when you're looking at Act 2, Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet. But it was an amazing experience, and I really highly recommend it for one big reason. Like I said, if you are going into the games media, you're a storyteller. And to tell a good story, you need to have a really big understanding of the world out there, the different experiences, the different types of people that inhabit it. And what university does is it throws you into this melting pot and this mesh of ideas, people studying different subjects to you, societies that will have you literally from, there was a skydiving society at the University of York, which is mad, to like, people that you meet in halls. All of that information you can kind of take and ingest and then apply later in life. And also, just the societies themselves, probably the biggest work experience that I got was being editor of my student paper. So if you are interested in games media and you do go to university, plug yourself in to whatever content creation there is on campus, because there will be loads. There'll probably even be a TV and film society. And I'd really highly recommend that you go and check that out, because I wish that I'd got involved with York's TV kind of station, and I didn't, and it meant that I had to teach myself. Oh my gosh, there is so much rain outside. I had to teach myself kind of camera stuff, and it's a lot harder when you're actually learning it on the job. So if you can teach yourself while you're studying, that's great. So yeah, I'd say it's not totally necessary that you go to university if you're studying games media. I mentioned Mark Brown earlier. He famously did not go to university. He became editor of Pocket Gamer, I think, at like 19 years old, and just kind of worked his way up. So it totally is possible to make a career in games media without it. But I did, and I don't regret it. So what should you know that's not taught on a course? And probably the biggest thing that I can tell you is how to deal with criticism. Because if you go into the games media, you're going to have a lot of people with a lot of opinions about the stuff that you write, and they'll be very vocal about it. And that's really tricky because particularly if you start working for a site like IGN or GameSpot, you're exposing yourself on this platform where it can roll in from everything from like comments under the video to a storm on your Twitter profile. So you wake up in the morning and it's just like click, 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 click. And the trouble with that is that can really affect kind of your vision for the content that you create. It can make you go, oh, okay, well, maybe I should be doing this. And actually, the best bit of advice I ever received in my career came from my managing editor at IGN, Krupa, who I just joined. And I was getting really frustrated that all the videos that I were creating, none of my ideas were being engaged with. They were all comments on my appearance. And it really frustrated me. And he was like, Alysia, how many times have you ever commented on a video? And I'm going to ask you guys the same question. Can you guys remember the last time that you commented on a video? Raise your hand if you can. Cool. We've got a few, which is great. But the vast majority didn't put your hands up. And the people who did put their hands up, when you commented on a video, is it like a super regular thing, or was it just something that totally moved you? Both? Bit of both? Okay, cool. Fractionally, the amount of people who comment on videos are quite low. And the people who comment a negative comment, I bet that you didn't use swear words in you didn't say to that person, I don't know whether I'll be dragged off stage for saying the word that I was about to say. People don't. If you are the sort of person who leaves a comment using the sort of language that you wouldn't say to someone's face, then you actually represent a really tiny section of society. And so if as a content creator you start changing your strategy or deciding, okay, maybe we should do this in a video to placate that particular person, you're actually bending your entire content creation to suit maybe 1% of the people who watch your videos. And it doesn't, the thing that I hate most is when people say to you, oh, don't read the comments, ignore them, or don't feed the trolls. Because that is total bullshit. That is going to stick, and it's worth talking about and lifting. But just from if you ever get a job in the games media, the things that you should look at for whether a video is successful is not how many people went, woo, yeah, you're great, or how many people went, oh, I hated that. It's the metrics. Always look at the metrics. Look at the amount of views. Look at the amount of shares. If you're on YouTube, look at the length of engagement time that people watched a video for. That's what we would always do whenever we started a new video at IGN. If people made it through the first half of a video, we were like, this is a successful series, let's carry this on. Don't let comments affect your strategy. But definitely have a cup of tea with a friend after reading them afterwards. And the other second big thing that I would definitely say that what you should know that's not taught on a course is finding what it is that you want to talk about. I think when I first started, I found it a little bit hard because a lot of the games media that I'd kind of read that I loved was sort of Zero Punctuation and Charlie Brooker, and I love that style. They're so funny. It's that sort of cynical, dry, really funny games criticism, and I really enjoyed reading it, but it wasn't my voice. My voice is a lot more, let's celebrate that. Have you seen this really cool thing? Let's explode that out and kind of take it apart. That's fascinating. And for a while, though, I kind of pushed that down because I'd read so much of the cynical games media, I thought I had to be that. And so I tried to emulate it. And people would just go, Alysia, what are you doing? Because if I try and say something cynical, people get offended because in my voice, it sounds awful. But if you say it in a British accent, that's very sort of huh. So yeah, basically, if you're going to create content, work out what's you? What's your personality? How can you draw this out? How would you talk to your friend about a game down a pub? That's probably your voice. And don't be afraid of engaging that. You know, Gav Murphy is this Welsh, recalcitrant sort of beer-drinking, lovely, lovely man. And he's made an entire career at IGN out of just, like, being himself. And yeah, it's totally possible to be authentically you and create really great content. Which brings me to best practices. So I can kind of like judge how to advise you. Who here wants to write articles, is interested in kind of like the writing side? Okay, got like a couple of hands. Mostly video then, I'm guessing. Who here is more interested in video and video production? Okay, cool. I'll kind of focus on video, but throw in a few writing tips. So really for videos, you want to keep videos roughly between 5 and 10 minutes long, particularly when you're working on a site like IGN or GameSpot, because people tend to have slightly shorter attention spans. But there's a really big but with that. When it comes to games media, like, I genuinely think if your content is interesting enough and you're editing it well enough, people will stay engaged. It's learning tricks of the trade. So when you're editing a video, say if you're going from like an introduction section, you're using like one bit of a music bed underneath. And then when you maybe move into the next section where you're talking about a particular aspect of this game that like fascinated you, you do a sort of quick cut and you change the bed. And it just means that, you know, a 10-minute video, suddenly you're taking the audience on a journey and it stops being this sort of repetitive, monotone thing. Like, you know, it's all about learning tricks of editing to keep people engaged and to just kind of move them along. Don't be afraid to, if you think you've got a really good idea, do a 15-minute video. That's fine. Also, what people don't focus on with video a lot is they'll go, I've got a really, really great idea for this video. They don't think about the headline and the thumbnail from the beginning. And this goes for if you're just making videos in your bedroom at home and you're starting your own YouTube channel. Like, think of the headline and thumbnail first. That is literally on my production checklist. Whenever I start any video, it's like, great idea, cool, right, how would I headline that? What would my thumbnail be? Before I've figured out what cameras I would use, before I've started editing it or like started filming. And at every single stage, you have to think about that, because if no one is clicking on your video, no matter how wonderful it is and how interesting the content, if you've got a bad headline and your thumbnail is just kind of people won't click on it on the landing page, and it's such a shame because there's so much great content out there that gets lost. So really think about how to market it. And also work in a team. I've made my fair share of videos by myself, and they're good and they're fine, but I really, really feel like in video production, no man is an island. Like, for a start, it's just easier if you're like doing 2 cameras at once and it's just you. It's super tricky. But also, the amount of times you'll come up across a problem or a thing or an idea that you want to present and you just can't articulate it in the right way, and someone will just come along and say, oh yeah, do that. Like, you know, even if it's just, at the moment, you're making videos outside of your bedroom and you're experimenting, have a friend just come and like watch your edits at least once before you put it online. Like, screen them, just have multiple views on something. Like, everywhere that I've worked for, even, so I've done some work with BBC Radio 1 producing the gaming show, and like we would always do screeners, like at least 3 with like non-gamers and gamers combined, just to make sure that we were articulating things well enough. Oh, and the final thing on video, make sure your video is ready at least 4 days before the original live date, because I guarantee something will prop up last minute, and if you are creating a video with the aim of putting it out like that day, you are not giving yourself a buffer, and you will end up either not being able to put the video out or putting out something that you're not happy with. So always aim to basically work with a good 4 or 5 working days ahead of time. And just really quickly on articles, and it kind of applies to scripts as well. A lot of people in games media really want to insert lots of jokes and kind of make it about their personality, which does really work in certain cases. You know, opinion pieces, features, I love that. But actually, especially when you're starting out, keeping introductions short, pithy, to the point. And even when you scale it up and you start writing for somewhere like The Guardian, there's a real skill in being able to write short. When I first started out at Official PlayStation Magazine, they put me on the 100-word reviews. It's this little page at the back. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess this is on the work experience student. Yeah, just put me on the back page. And they were like, no, like this is how you sharpen your skill as a writer, because anyone can write a 2-page spread. Anyone can write 1,000 words. But to be able to sum up your idea in 100 words, or to describe a game's mechanics in 50 words, that's a real skill, and it will serve you well in your writing as you take it forward. To be able to begin an article with a 2-sentence introduction rather than a whole paragraph, you will keep your audience more engaged, and you will have the message of your article will be delivered with a bigger punch. And yeah, the second thing would be don't put clickbait in the headline. That happens quite a lot, and it poisons audiences against you. I wrote an article for the BBC where the headline was "Man wins Best Presenter at Women in Games Awards," and he did. That was the headline was describing exactly what happens. A man won Best Presenter at the Women in Games Awards. But loads of people were like, oh, clickbait headline, because it sounds so far-fetched, and people assume. And then when they read a headline like that and it's to do with games. So it's kind of like, be able to sum up your idea really, really short, really, really pithily, and you will represent the games industry well. That kind of draws me to the end of this section. So I'd just say, if you are interested in games media and you want to kind of dive further into some of these ideas, this is kind of a list of places that I often go to for my ideas. Particularly if you want to get into the games media, the more that you understand of games design, the better. You don't have to articulate it loads, because sometimes the audience isn't interested in the ins and outs of how one particular character was rendered. But if you know that, that is so helpful, because you can actually understand, the foundations of how a game is being created, and that will help you in how you tell the story of it. So the GDC Vault is amazing for that. Every year after GDC, I just rinse it and watch all of the videos that I can on game design, even though I've never made a game in my life. The art of game design is also really, really great. And I've ended on NPR TED Talks podcast, just because that's something that I really like to listen to, but it's an example of look at how people outside the games industry are talking about ideas and breaking them down. This goes for game design in general. I think a lot of game developers, when they pitch me a game, they'll say, oh, it's Angry Birds, but with cats. And there's this kind of idea of we're quite incestuous. We pull a lot of our ideas from ourselves and our own industry, which means that you get the same ideas over and over. And that works for games media as well. We get the same sorts of videos made, the same sorts of voices. And if you go to places like, for me, the TED Talks podcast or something like that, you see how another outlet takes their ideas and represents them and creates content around them. And you can go, oh, actually, I know that they were talking about politics, but that was a really, really great way of breaking down a really abstract concept. Maybe I can explain crunch in a way that people who've never worked in the games industry will understand by taking that idea. So yeah, basically read widely, listen widely, and watch widely. And I think you'll make a really good games journalist. Cool. That's it from me.
So a big round of applause there for Alysia Judge. Brilliant. Thank you.